The founding of the Order of the Garter in 1348, chivalry, kingship, and the cult of St. George. In 1348, as Europe was ravaged by the twin catastrophes of war and plague, Edward III of England laid the foundations for a new chivalric order that would shape the nature of knighthood, monarchy, and elite identity for centuries. The creation of the most noble Order of the Garter was not a spontaneous flourish of courtly vanity, but a calculated act of royal image-making. Edward III's new order fused the mythology of Arthurian legend, the religious sanctity of St. George, and the military prestige of England's war successes into a potent symbol of martial and political legitimacy. It was an expression of national ambition, an attempt to centralize baronial loyalty, and a cultural response to the fragmentation caused by the Black Death. Let's explore the founding, evolution, and lasting significance of the Order of the Garter in extensive depth. We shall examine the historical context of 1348, Edward III's chivalric ideology, the symbolic and ritual features of the order, its political, diplomatic, and cultural utility, and its long-term legacy. In doing so, we will reveal how Edward's invention of a knightly brotherhood served not only to bind his most trusted nobles but to articulate a new model of kingship, one that married military success, divine favor, and elite fraternity into a singular political instrument. Historical context: England in 1348. The year 1348 was one of extreme dislocation. It marked the arrival of the Black Death in England, the most catastrophic demographic event in European history. The plague would kill between 1/3 and 1/2 of the population in less than 2 years, radically transforming the structures of labor, economy, and social life. Against this background of apocalyptic fear and social upheaval, Edward III's Order of the Garter appears as an attempt to stabilize a shaken aristocracy and reassert a sense of noble order. But it also reflected the grand ambitions of a king in the midst of an escalating dynastic conflict with France. In 1337, Edward had declared his claim to the French crown, initiating what would become the 100 Years' War. English victories at sea and on land, most notably at the naval Battle of Sluis, 1340, and the Battle of Crécy, 1346, had begun to establish England as a formidable power. Yet England's martial gains required domestic stability, and Edward faced ongoing concerns about aristocratic rebellion, rivalries, and the dislocations of war finance. In this context, the Order of the Garter was conceived as both a religious and political salve. It sought to channel aristocratic energies into a shared identity centered on the crown, while also projecting an image of divine legitimacy and national purpose. The plague did not delay the order's creation. In fact, the existential fears it generated may have made the order's sacred and martial character even more urgent. Edward III and the cult of chivalry. Edward III's commitment to chivalry was not mere romanticism, it was a strategic component of kingship. Edward saw himself as the heir not only to English kings but to the legendary figures of British mythology, especially King Arthur. He held tournaments styled after the Round Table, sponsored epic poetry, and deliberately cultivated a court culture that elevated knightly values. Chivalry became both an aesthetic and ideological framework for his rule. This revival of chivalry had a political function. It provided a language through which Edward could elevate military service into a moral and sacred duty. By rewarding bravery and loyalty with ritualized honor, he could incentivize the behaviors necessary for the maintenance of both military campaigns and domestic order. Chivalric values allowed the crown to foster competition among nobles in a way that discouraged rebellion and valorized obedience. The Order of the Garter was the ultimate manifestation of this chivalric ideology. It allowed Edward to gather his most powerful and influential knights into a tightly controlled institution where hierarchy was visible, rituals were exacting, and the king was the undisputed focal point. Unlike broader knightly orders such as the French Ordre de l'Étoile, the Garter was exclusive and personal, tied directly to Edward's person and his political vision. The founding legend, the Countess of Salisbury and the Fallen Garter. One of the most enduring stories about the order's foundation involves a moment of apparent scandal at court. According to the later legend, a lady, often said to be Joan of Kent or the Countess of Salisbury, dropped her garter during a dance. When courtiers snickered, Edward retrieved the garment and rebuked them, saying, "Honi soit qui mal y pense, shame on him who thinks evil of it." This phrase became the order's motto, and the blue garter its symbol. Though the story likely emerged decades after the Order's founding, it encapsulates essential themes of chivalric culture: the defense of feminine honor, the elevation of ritual over gossip, and the association of knighthood with the defense of virtue. More importantly, it provided a memorable and narratively compelling origin story for the Order, one that grounded its rituals in the everyday culture of courtly life while investing them with higher meaning. Whether apocryphal or not, the tale reflects how Edward III wanted the Order to be perceived, as a community bound not only by blood or feudal ties, but by honor, discretion, and shared moral purpose. The fallen garter, lifted and transformed into a badge of glory, symbolizes the elevation of mundane loyalty into sacred commitment. Structure and membership of the Order. The Order of the Garter was designed to be an elite institution, limited initially to Edward III and 25 companions. This exclusivity was crucial to its prestige. In a society where rank and honor were paramount, inclusion in a select group bound by sacred oaths and ritual distinguished its members as a new chivalric aristocracy. Unlike broader knightly orders on the continent, the Garter emphasized selectiveness and royal favor. Membership was drawn from the highest ranks of the nobility, men who had proven their loyalty in war or served with distinction in court. Many were veterans of Edward's campaigns in France or Ireland. The act of selecting knights personally reinforced the bond between the monarch and his companions, bypassing feudal intermediaries and cultivating direct loyalty. The institution thus functioned as an extension of Edward's political will, a personal retinue spiritualized through ceremony. Each knight received a blue garter to wear around the leg and was assigned a stall in St. George's Chapel at Windsor. The ceremonial paraphernalia, mantles, swords, banners, was not merely ornamental. It established a visual language of honor that communicated ideals of duty, fraternity, and obedience. The regalia also reflected status, reinforcing internal hierarchy while expressing the collective unity of the Order. Importantly, the Garter's structure was not static. Over time, it developed rules, records, and administrative officers, such as the Garter King of Arms, who managed heraldry and oversaw protocol. The creation of the College of St. George institutionalized these functions, ensuring continuity and linking the Order to both courtly and ecclesiastical authority. What began as a tightly knit fraternity of elite warriors gradually evolved into a ceremonial body embedded in the very fabric of English governance. Spiritual patron and political symbol. St. George, the dragon-slaying warrior saint, was chosen as the Order's patron in part because of his pre-existing popularity in England. His cult had grown throughout the 13th and early 14th centuries, especially among crusaders and knights. Edward III's decision to place the Order under George's protection reinforced the sanctity of its mission and aligned it with a broader Christian ideal of holy warfare. George's story, a lone knight confronting evil and rescuing the innocent, resonated with the chivalric identity that Edward promoted. It was no accident that George supplanted other patron saints of England. Where St. Edmund and St. Edward the Confessor symbolized passive piety, George represented action, courage, and divine victory. He became the embodiment of militant English Christianity. St. George's Chapel at Windsor, constructed and expanded to house the Order's ceremonies, became a monumental site of sacred kingship. Here, politics and religion fused. The annual Garter feast on St. George's Day was not only a moment of ritual cohesion for the knights, but also a liturgical event that embedded royal authority within divine providence. Clerics attached to the College of St. George offered prayers for the Order and for the souls of dead companions, creating a spiritual economy of loyalty and remembrance. Over time, George's red cross on a white background became a national emblem. The Garter played a significant role in this transformation. As knights wore the cross and invoked the saint's name in battle, he became synonymous with English military success and national pride. Thus, St. George was not merely a patron but a constructed political symbol, crafted, promoted, and institutionalized through the rituals and propaganda of the Order of the Garter. The role of the Order in the 100 Years' War. The Order of the Garter was not an idle ceremonial body, it was forged in the fires of the 100 Years' War and closely entwined with England's military ambitions on the continent. Many of its original members were seasoned commanders, veterans of the battles of Crécy and Calais, and key figures in Edward III's war effort. Their induction into the Order was not only a reward for battlefield valor but a means of reinforcing cohesion among the military elite. The war itself provided the order with its practical context and ideological framework. It justified the ritualization of martial virtue and allowed Edward to position his dynastic ambitions as a sacred crusade. Through the symbolism of St. George and the Garter, the king portrayed the conflict with France not as a dynastic struggle alone, but as a just war endorsed by heaven. The order thus became an essential element of wartime propaganda, fostering morale, unity, and divine legitimacy. Knights of the Garter were expected to embody courage, discipline, and loyalty. Their role extended beyond the battlefield. They served in diplomatic missions, regional governance, and domestic council. They were expected to maintain a model of chivalric conduct that reinforced Edward's vision of a united Christian monarchy waging a righteous war. The order became a network of influence and loyalty, spreading Edward's ideals and consolidating political control. Even after Edward's greatest campaigns, the Garter maintained its martial resonance. Later monarchs would invoke its ethos to legitimize their own military efforts, and the symbolism of the order remained potent during subsequent phases of the Hundred Years' War. In effect, the order institutionalized a model of noble warfare that served the crown's agenda and shaped the very meaning of English knighthood. Ceremonial and architectural foundations. Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle, already a royal residence of strategic and symbolic importance, was transformed under Edward III into the ceremonial epicenter of the Order of the Garter. The expansion and adornment of the castle, especially the construction of St. George's Chapel, created a physical space where royal ideology could be enacted and perpetuated. The choice of Windsor was deeply meaningful. Located above the Thames and steeped in Anglo-Saxon and Norman royal history, Windsor embodied dynastic continuity. Its association with Arthurian myth, specifically Edward's earlier attempt to establish a round table there, linked the physical site to the mythic past. As the order's rituals developed, Windsor became a stage for the liturgical and political performance of chivalry. The architectural and artistic design of the chapel and associated buildings reflected the values of the order. Heraldic devices, carved stalls, and stained glass windows depicted Garter knights, biblical warriors, and saintly figures, merging martial and sacred iconography. The spatial arrangement of the chapel, knights seated facing one another, their banners suspended above, visually represented the ideals of equality, surveillance, and sacred fraternity. Annual ceremonies at Windsor, especially on the Feast of St. George, brought the nobility together in a shared cycle of worship, feasting, and commemoration. These events reinforced the structure of the order, elevated the prestige of its members, and reasserted the moral and political authority of the crown. They also made Windsor a living monument to Edward's vision of kingship, one that united heritage, ritual, and sacred duty in stone and spectacle. Political utility, loyalty, and elite cohesion. The Order of the Garter was a powerful tool for political consolidation. In an era when noble families wielded immense regional power, Edward III needed a mechanism to ensure loyalty without resorting solely to coercion. The Garter served this purpose elegantly. By inviting key nobles into an exclusive fraternity centered on the king, Edward fostered a shared identity that transcended factionalism. Membership in the order was more than an honor, it was a public statement of allegiance. Knights were expected to uphold the values of loyalty and service to the crown, and exclusion from the order could signal royal displeasure. Inclusion, by contrast, could be used to reward support, co-opt ambitious lords, or reconcile former adversaries. In this sense, the order functioned as a political adhesive, binding together a fragmented aristocracy through shared symbols and rituals. The order also had the advantage of continuity. It allowed monarchs to reinforce dynastic claims by referencing a tradition of noble service and divine favor. Successive kings could draw on the prestige of the Garter to assert their legitimacy, even in times of crisis or transition. The order provided a stable platform for royal authority, one that endured long after the reign of Edward III. In sum, the political utility of the Garter was immense. It provided an arena in which status could be displayed, loyalty affirmed, and dissent managed, all under the veneer of sacred tradition and chivalric brotherhood. Gender and exclusion, the role of women. Although the Order of the Garter was founded in a courtly environment where women played significant social and symbolic roles, it remained strictly male in membership. The paradox is striking. The founding myth centers on a woman's dropped garter, yet the order institutionalized an elite culture that excluded women from its formal structures. This exclusion reflects broader medieval norms that linked authority, landholding, and military service, central prerequisites for order membership, with male identity. Chivalric orders were designed around the ideal of the warrior knight, a figure inaccessible to women under feudal and ecclesiastical law. Even queens and noblewomen who wielded great influence in court and diplomacy remained outside the order's formal hierarchy. However, women were not absent from the order's world. As patrons, intermediaries, and symbolic figures, they played vital roles in sustaining the chivalric culture the Garter embodied. Courtly literature, heraldic emblems, and tournament pageantry regularly invoked idealized images of female virtue and beauty, reinforcing the moral framework within which knights operated. Over time, women would gain limited recognition in Garter tradition. From the Tudor era onward, select royal women were granted honorary roles or admitted as ladies of the Garter, though always outside the core fraternity. These inclusions, while notable, did not fundamentally alter the gendered foundations of the order. Yet they do suggest the ways in which female presence was acknowledged, even as it remained. International prestige and diplomacy. From its earliest days, the Order of the Garter served as an international diplomatic tool. Edward III inducted foreign princes and nobles into the order to cement alliances, honor cooperation, or signal recognition. The inclusion of Alfonso XI of Castile and later European rulers transformed the order into a vehicle of soft power, projecting English influence across borders. The ceremonial and symbolic value of the order made it particularly useful in courtly diplomacy. To be named a Knight of the Garter was to be acknowledged as a peer by the English crown. It flattered recipients, reinforced mutual bonds, and placed Edward, and his successors, at the center of a pan-European chivalric network. The Garter thus extended the crown's reach and reputation well beyond England. This internationalism continued into the early modern period, when the order's prestige was instrumentalized in negotiations, peace treaties, and dynastic marriages. Monarchs such as Emperor Charles V and foreign nobles including the Dukes of Burgundy embraced the Garter's symbolism as a mark of mutual elite status. In doing so, they reinforced a shared aristocratic culture while elevating the symbolic capital of the English monarchy. Legacy in the late medieval and early modern periods. The Order of the Garter outlived the crises of the later 14th century and became a durable feature of English political life. Under Richard II, it retained its prestige, even as court politics became increasingly fraught. The Lancastrian and Yorkist kings of the 15th century used the order to assert legitimacy during the Wars of the Roses, granting membership to key supporters and invoking its tradition to cloak contested reigns in sanctity. In the Tudor period, the Garter was revitalized. Henry VIII, in particular, embraced its spectacle, aligning it with his vision of kingship as both sacred and imperial. He expanded the chapel, codified ceremonies, and used the order to project power at home and abroad. Elizabeth I used it selectively to manage court factions and demonstrate royal magnificence. By the 17th century, the order had become a central component of royal iconography and ritual. It persisted through the upheavals of civil war and restoration, adapting to new political realities while retaining its aura of continuity. Its survival into the modern era attests to its symbolic power, its adaptability, and the enduring appeal of chivalric ideals in English statecraft. Historiography and interpretation. Scholars have interpreted the founding of the Order of the Garter in a variety of ways. Early antiquarians emphasized its Arthurian and romantic dimensions, portraying it as a revival of noble virtue. Victorian historians, steeped in nationalism, celebrated the Garter as a symbol of England's martial and moral greatness. Modern historians have taken a more critical approach. Many now see the order as a political invention, an instrument of royal governance dressed in the language of honor. Edward III's ability to co-opt and control the aristocracy through symbolism and ritual is increasingly appreciated as a masterstroke of medieval statecraft. Other scholars focus on the order's performative aspects. They examine how ceremonies at Windsor reinforced political hierarchies, shaped noble behavior, and projected royal legitimacy. Gender historians have explored the paradox of the order's founding myth and institutional exclusion, highlighting tensions between courtly rhetoric and social reality. The order remains a rich subject for historical inquiry, reflecting broader shifts in the understanding of monarchy, memory, and medieval political culture. The Garter as icon of English chivalry. The Order of the Garter stands as one of the most enduring legacies of Edward III's reign. Conceived in the shadow of plague and amid the fires of war, it fused political necessity with chivalric aspiration. Through its rituals, symbols, and membership, it articulated a vision of monarchy grounded in sacred duty, military virtue, and elite fraternity. The Garter shaped the identity of English knighthood, provided a stage for royal performance, and helped knit together a volatile aristocracy. It linked the English monarchy to broader European traditions while asserting a distinct national ethos. That it survives today, as the oldest and most prestigious order of knighthood in Britain, is a testament to its adaptability and the power of its founding ideals. To understand the order is to understand the world of medieval kingship, its anxieties, its ambitions, and its belief in the redemptive potential of honor, ritual, and myth. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.